that longtime Republican Senator Lindsey Graham has passed away. His office says he died on Saturday night after what they call a brief and sudden illness. The statement says Graham's family is asking for privacy at this time.
Lindsey Graham spent decades in Washington being two different men at the same time. One was the old Senate dealmaker who could cry over Joe Biden, travel with John McCain, defend Ukraine, and talk about public service like it still meant something. The other was the Trump-era survivor who swallowed his own warnings, defended the man he once condemned, and became one of the strangest symbols of Republican surrender. Now, after his sudden death, the real double life leaking out is not one secret. It is the contradiction he spent 29 years trying to outrun. The double life was hiding in public. When people hear the phrase double life, they usually imagine something hidden behind locked doors. In Lindsey Graham's case, the more revealing story was hiding in plain sight. It was on cable news. It was in Senate hallways. It was in the way Democrats who fought him still called him funny, warm, or human. It was in the way Donald Trump praised him after years of humiliating him. It was in the way Ukraine supporters remembered him as one of the few Republicans still willing to confront Vladimir Putin, while critics remembered him as someone who helped normalize Trump's most dangerous instincts. That is what the example videos understood correctly. The story works because Graham was not one simple villain or one simple statesman. He was a bundle of contradictions. He could be vicious in politics and sentimental in private. He could defend the Senate as an institution and then help bend that same institution around Trump. He could call out Trump in 2015 with language that sounded final, then spend the next decade proving nothing in Washington is ever final if power is on the other side. That is the real hook. Lindsey Graham's double life was not that nobody knew who he was. It was that everyone knew a different version. And all of them were real enough to be uncomfortable. After his death, those versions began colliding. Joe Biden released a tribute that sounded like it came from an older political world, one where opponents could travel together, argue loudly, and still recognize each other's humanity. Trump, meanwhile, turned Graham's memory into proof of his own political narrative, praising the man who had once called him unfit. Online commentators reacted with anger, mockery, and old rumors. Foreign leaders looked at his work on Ukraine and Russia. South Carolina looked at the empty Senate seat he left behind. And suddenly, the question was not just what Lindsey Graham had done. It was who he had really been. The South Carolina senator who wanted to be taken seriously. Lindsey Graham's story began long before Trump. He was from Central South Carolina, and his personal biography was built around loss, responsibility, and ambition. After his parents died when he was still young, Graham helped raise his younger sister, Darlene. That detail matters because it complicates the cartoon version of him. Before he became a cable news fixture, before he became a Trump loyalist, before he became the senator people mocked online, he was a young man who took on adult responsibility early and built a career around service, law, and politics. He served in the Air Force, worked as a lawyer, and entered Congress in the 1990s. By 2003, he was in the United States Senate, representing South Carolina. For years, Graham built a reputation as a defense hawk and a Republican who could sometimes work across the aisle. He was conservative, often aggressively so, but he also wanted to be seen as a serious lawmaker. He cared about military policy, foreign affairs, judges, immigration negotiations, and the Senate's role in national security. He was not just another background senator. He was everywhere, always talking, always maneuvering, always trying to remain relevant. But even then, the split was forming. Graham wanted the respect of institutions, but he also wanted the protection of power. He wanted to be known as independent, but he understood South Carolina Republican politics well enough to know that independence had limits. He could sound like a truth-teller one day and a party soldier the next. That tension did not begin with Trump. Trump simply exposed it. The McCain shadow. To understand Graham, you have to understand John McCain. McCain was not just Graham's colleague. He was his closest political partner, mentor, and emotional anchor in the Senate. Together, they represented a particular kind of Republican foreign policy: hawkish, interventionist, intensely pro-military, and committed to the idea that America had to lead the world through strength. Whether someone agreed with that worldview or not, it gave Graham a moral structure. In McCain's orbit, Graham looked like a certain kind of Republican, tough on foreign enemies, willing to compromise on some domestic issues, and loyal to the Senate as a place where relationships still mattered. That version of Graham had real confidence. He could be sharp, funny, dramatic, and sometimes theatrical, but he had a lane. He was the national security Republican who traveled the world, defended allies, criticized isolationism, and saw Russia as a threat. His support for Ukraine later came from this same worldview. When Russia invaded Ukraine, Graham did not sound like the newer wing of his party that wanted to retreat from global commitments. He sounded like the old McCain-Graham Republican who believed Putin had to be confronted. But McCain also made Graham's later transformation look more painful. Trump mocked McCain. Trump attacked his war record. Trump insulted the very man Graham had loved and defended for years. In the old story, that should have been the line Graham never crossed. But Washington is full of lines that disappear when the voters move. And as Trump became the center of Republican politics, Graham faced the choice that defined the rest of his career: stand with the old code and risk being left behind, or adapt to the new one and survive. The Trump warning that became a confession. In 2015, Lindsey Graham seemed to see Donald Trump clearly. He did not offer mild criticism. He called Trump a race-baiting, xenophobic, religious bigot. He said Trump did not represent his party or the values of the men and women in uniform. At the time, those words sounded like a warning. Years later, they sounded like a confession from a man who knew exactly what he was about to excuse. That is the central contradiction of Graham's public life. He did not fall for Trump because he lacked information. He had already said the quiet part out loud. He knew the danger. He named it. He understood what Trump was doing to the Republican Party and to American politics. Then, after Trump won, Graham slowly moved closer anyway. He golfed with him. He defended him. He translated him for television. He became one of the Republicans' reporters called whenever they needed to understand what Trump might do next. That is why people could never stop talking about Graham. His loyalty did not look innocent. It looked chosen. Every time he defended Trump, the old quote came back. Every time he attacked Democrats on Trump's behalf, people remembered that he had once sounded just as alarmed as they were. The double life was no longer hidden. It was replayed in split screen. Lindsey Graham before Trump, and Lindsey Graham after Trump. The private war between principle and survival. The original twist here is that Lindsey Graham's double life was not simply hypocrisy. Hypocrisy is too small a word for what happened. His double life was a survival strategy that became his identity. He seemed to believe he could stay close to Trump without becoming fully consumed by him. He may have told himself that proximity meant influence. If he could stay in the room, maybe he could moderate Trump on national security, Ukraine, judges, or foreign policy. If he could flatter Trump enough, maybe he could steer him when it mattered. That is how many politicians justify compromise. They tell themselves they are not surrendering. They are managing the danger. But the danger with Trump was that everyone who thought they were managing him eventually became part of his performance. Graham may have believed he was using access to protect his priorities. Trump used Graham's access to prove that even his critics could be brought to heel. This is why the story feels so unsettling. Graham did not become Trump's ally because he had always been a Trumpist. He became Trump's ally after demonstrating that he knew better. That made his loyalty more valuable to Trump and more frustrating to critics. Every converted enemy proves the leader's dominance. Graham's transformation sent a message. If even Lindsey Graham, McCain's closest friend, could bend, then almost anyone in the Republican Party could bend. The Biden friendship that confused everyone. One of the most revealing pieces of Graham's life was his relationship with Joe Biden. The two men served together in the Senate for years. They disagreed often, sometimes loudly, but they came from an older Senate culture where relationships were built through travel, committees, late-night conversations, and shared institutional life. Graham once became emotional while talking about Biden as a person, saying that if you could not admire Joe Biden, you needed to do some self-evaluation. That moment became famous because it showed a Lindsey Graham who seemed almost impossible to reconcile with the later partisan warrior. That version of Graham did not vanish completely. It leaked out in tributes after his death. Biden's response treated Graham not as a cartoon enemy, but as a colleague from a world that had almost disappeared. That was part of why the reaction online became so divided. Some people saw the tribute as decency. Others saw it as another example of Washington elites forgiving each other while ordinary people lived with the consequences of their votes. Both reactions revealed the same truth. Lindsey Graham lived in the gap between personal warmth and public harm. He could be kind to someone across the aisle and still support policies that many people saw as cruel. He could have private friendships and public positions that contradicted the values those friendships seemed to imply. That was not unusual in Washington, but Graham made it unusually visible because his emotional side was so exposed. He did not hide that he liked people. He also did not stop attacking them when politics required it. Ukraine, Russia, and the one line he held. If there was one issue where Graham remained relatively consistent, it was Russia. He saw Vladimir Putin as a threat and supported Ukraine's fight after Russia's invasion. Even many of Graham's harshest critics acknowledged that his defense of Ukraine was one of the few places where he seemed to resist the isolationist drift inside parts of the Trump-era Republican Party. He pushed sanctions, argued for stronger support, and worked with Democrats like Richard Blumenthal on Russia-related measures. That matters because it complicates the story again. A lazy version would say Graham had no principles at all. The more interesting version is that he had some principles he would fight for, and others he was willing to trade away. Ukraine was one of the causes that still connected him to the old McCain worldview. He believed America should confront authoritarian aggression abroad, especially from Russia. That belief did not fit neatly with Trump's softer posture toward Putin, and it sometimes made Graham's balancing act harder. In the final phase of his career, Graham was still pushing Russia sanctions. That became part of the legacy conversation immediately after his death. Some senators wanted to move forward with the legislation he had championed. That is where the old Lindsey and the Trump-era Lindsey collided again. His sanctions push was serious and bipartisan, but it also depended on navigating Trump's power. Even his foreign policy legacy had to pass through the political world that had transformed him. The Israel, Iran, and Saudi Arabia pressure point. The example script also mentions Iran, Israel, and Saudi normalization, and that belongs in the improved version because it shows how Graham saw himself near the end, as someone still operating at the center of global crisis. He was deeply involved in U.S. foreign policy debates around Israel, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Russia, and Ukraine. He liked being in the middle of the hardest problems. He saw himself as a senator who could talk to presidents, foreign leaders, generals, and intelligence officials, then appear on Sunday television to explain the stakes. That was part of his identity. Graham was not a quiet legislator who preferred the background. He wanted proximity to power. He wanted to be in the room. That desire helped him matter, but it also made him vulnerable. Because when politics changed, staying in the room required new sacrifices. Under McCain, proximity to power meant being part of an old, hawkish Republican establishment. Under Trump, it meant flattering a leader Graham had once denounced. So when stories after his death mentioned his final conversations, foreign policy priorities, and unfinished agenda, they fit the larger pattern. Graham wanted to be remembered as a player, not a spectator. But the price of remaining a player was that he kept adapting to whoever controlled the board. The rumors that exploded after his death. After Graham's death, online discussion did not remain respectful for long. Rumors about his private life resurfaced immediately, especially old jokes and allegations around the nickname Lady G. Some commentators claimed that with Graham gone, people would now feel freer to speak. Others argued that focusing on private life speculation was unnecessary, cruel, or beside the point. The example videos lean hard into that reaction because it is clickable, emotional, and messy. But the stronger script should be clearer. Unverified claims about someone's private, intimate life should not be treated as proven fact just because the internet wants a scandal. The real story does not need that to be powerful. Graham's public record already contains enough contradiction. He supported policies that hurt LGBTQ Americans while also becoming the subject of long-running speculation and jokes. That tension fueled outrage, but the important political issue is not whether a rumor is true. It is the hypocrisy people perceived between public moralizing and private ambiguity. This is the safer and stronger angle. The leak that matters is not gossip. It is the way death removed the polite filter around his legacy. People who felt harmed by his politics did not want to pretend he was merely a charming colleague. People who knew him personally wanted to remember his humanity. People who watched his Trump transformation saw a cautionary tale. All of those reactions leaked out at once, and together they painted a more complicated portrait than any single rumor could. The tributes that exposed the split. The reaction to Graham's death exposed the country almost as much as it exposed him. Biden remembered a Senate colleague. Trump remembered an ally, and immediately folded Graham into his own political messaging. Ukrainian voices remembered someone who had stood with them against Russia. Critics remembered a senator who supported conservative judges, opposed same-sex marriage, backed hardline foreign policy, and helped protect Trump when it mattered. Cable news hosts debated whether civility was still owed to powerful people whose policies had hurt vulnerable communities. After Graham's death, South Carolina Governor Henry McMaster appointed Darlene Graham to fill the remainder of his Senate term. Her swearing in on July 14, 2026, added a deeply personal layer to the story, because Darlene was not just a political placeholder. She was the sister Lindsey helped raise after their parents died. That brought the story back to the beginning. Before the Senate, before Trump, before McCain, before cable news, there was a family tragedy that shaped Graham's sense of responsibility. Darlene's appointment was historic for South Carolina and symbolically powerful for Graham's legacy. It suggested that even after a career defined by national fights, the final handoff was intimate. His seat passed, temporarily, to the person whose life had been tied to his earliest adult responsibilities. That does not erase the controversies. It does not settle the arguments. But it gives the ending a strange symmetry. So what was Lindsey Graham's double life? It was not just one hidden secret or one whispered rumor. It was the split between the man he seemed to know he should be and the man politics rewarded him for becoming. It was Biden's friend and Trump's defender, McCain's partner and Trump's survivor, Ukraine's ally and MAGA's translator, the Senate institutionalist and the television combatant, the man who warned America about Trump, and the man who helped make Trump acceptable to Republicans who once had doubts. That double life is more revealing than any tabloid story because it explains something bigger than Lindsey Graham. It explains what happened to a whole wing of the Republican Party. Many of them saw Trump clearly at first. Many of them criticized him. Many of them said he was dangerous, unserious, immoral, or unfit. Then he won, and they adjusted. Some adjusted quietly. Graham adjusted in public, on camera, year after year, until the adjustment became the story. The tragedy is that Graham may have believed he could keep both selves alive. He may have believed he could remain the old foreign policy hawk, the Senate dealmaker, the funny colleague, the friend of Biden and McCain, while also becoming the Trump ally South Carolina Republican politics demanded. But the longer he played both roles, the harder they became to separate. By the end, people could choose whichever Lindsey they wanted to remember, because he had given them evidence for all of them. Why it is finally leaking out. It is finally leaking out because death freezes a public life and forces everyone to decide what the story was. While Graham was alive, every contradiction could be explained as strategy, timing, loyalty, or survival. After death, the explanations become weaker. The record remains. The quotes remain. The videos remain. The votes remain. The friendships remain. The reversals remain. And the people who were hurt, helped, amused, disgusted, or protected by him all start speaking at once. That is why the internet could not settle on one reaction. Some people mourned. Some mocked. Some were angry at the tributes. Some focused on Ukraine. Some focused on Trump. Some resurfaced old rumors. Some remembered the funny senator they knew privately. But together, the noise told the truth. Lindsey Graham spent decades making himself impossible to categorize cleanly. The double life was not hidden for 29 years. It was tolerated for 29 years. Washington tolerated it because Washington loves useful contradictions. Voters tolerated it because partisanship rewards survival. Media tolerated it because Graham was always good television. And Graham himself tolerated it because it kept him near power. Only after he was gone did the contradiction become the whole story. So what do you think? Was Lindsey Graham a survivor who stayed close to power so he could influence it? Or was he the clearest example of what Washington does to people who want to keep their seat at any cost? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more stories about the hidden contradictions behind America's most powerful political figures, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next one.